Part 1. The Galactic Celebration Authority had existed for 3,000 standard cycles, and in all that time, it had mostly failed at its job. The GCA was supposed to help species across the galaxy celebrate together. That was its whole purpose. The unified worlds had brought together thousands of different species from thousands of different planets, and someone had decided that if they could just learn to celebrate together, they would understand each other better. Peace through parties, essentially. It had not worked. The problem was simple. Every species celebrated differently, and no one wanted to change. They held their luminescence festivals in perfect geometric patterns. Their light displays followed strict mathematical rules. Other species found them beautiful but cold, like watching a computer program instead of a party. They celebrated by drumming their hard outer shells together in complex rhythms. The sounds they made were meaningful to them, but to most other species, the frequencies caused headaches that lasted for days. The silicon-based monoliths simply vibrated at each other for weeks at a time. Everyone agreed this counted as celebration according to the official definitions, but it was deeply boring to watch. Senior Cultural Analyst 9 had been given the job of fixing this problem. She was a crystalline being, tall and thin, made of geometric lattices that caught the light in interesting ways. She had lived for 400 years and had spent most of that time being disappointed by things. Her job at the GCA had given her plenty of reasons to continue being disappointed. She had spent decades studying celebrations across 12,000 member worlds. She had written reports that no one read. She had attended conferences where delegates sat in separate sections based on their species and never talked to each other. She had watched the joy indices across the unified worlds drop lower and lower each year. The pattern was always the same. Species celebrated at each other, not with each other. They performed their traditions in front of other species like they were putting on shows. No one actually joined in. No one shared. Everyone stayed in their own group, doing their own thing, while the delegates from other worlds watched politely and wished they were somewhere else. Then humanity joined the unified worlds. Humans were a young species from a small planet in an unremarkable solar system. They had only achieved faster-than-light travel a few decades ago. The GCA had not paid much attention to them at first. They seemed ordinary enough. 2 arms, 2 legs, carbon-based biology, nothing special. Nine's first exposure to human celebration came through routine monitoring. The GCA kept track of all member species' cultural activities, and as a new member, humanity's broadcasts were being recorded and analyzed. Nine was scanning through the footage one evening, not expecting to find anything interesting. She found something very interesting. The footage showed something humans called a block party in a place called Brooklyn. At first, Nine was not sure what she was seeing. There were hundreds of humans gathered in a street. They had closed the street to vehicles and filled it with tables and chairs and cooking equipment. Music was playing from large speakers. Humans were everywhere, eating and talking and dancing. But that was not what caught her attention. What caught her attention was how different all the humans looked from each other. They had different skin colors. They wore different styles of clothing. Some of the older humans were teaching dances to younger humans, and Nine's analysis software confirmed that neither group had originated from the culture those dances came from. Humans were eating food prepared by other humans whose families had come from completely different parts of their planet. No one seemed to think this was strange. Someone had set up a device that sprayed water into the air. Human children were running through the spray and shrieking. Nine sensors analyzed the sound and confirmed it was genuine delight, not distress. The children came from multiple different family units. They did not seem to care. They were just playing together. In one corner, a human was painting designs on other humans' faces. Nine watched a human with light skin get a design painted that her database identified as traditionally associated with a culture of humans with darker skin. No one objected. The human whose face was being painted seemed happy. The human doing the painting seemed happy. Other humans nearby smiled and admired the work. 9 watched for 6 hours. She could not stop watching. She saw humans share food with strangers. She saw them teach their dances to anyone who wanted to learn. She saw elderly humans sitting in chairs, watching the young ones play, their faces showing what her emotional analysis software identified as deep contentment. She saw humans who clearly disagreed about things. She observed several animated political discussions, still share tables and break bread together. None of this made sense according to her understanding of cultural celebration. Species were supposed to be protective of their traditions. They were supposed to keep outsiders at a distance. That was what her 3,000 cycles of data showed. Humans did not seem to know this rule, or maybe they knew it and simply did not care. 9 filed an emergency report with the High Council of Celebration that night. She had never filed an emergency report before. In 400 years, she had never seen anything she considered worthy of one. She considered this worthy. "I believe," she wrote in her report, "we have found the template species." The High Council was skeptical. They were always skeptical. They had been running the GCA for 3,000 cycles, and they had heard plenty of claims about species that would change everything. None of those claims had ever turned out to be true. But 9 had included footage with her report. She had included data analysis. She had included emotional readings from the humans she had observed. The numbers did not lie. The humans at that block party had experienced more genuine collective joy in a single afternoon than most GCA-sponsored interspecies events produced in a week. The council agreed to further study. They authorized a research delegation to be sent to Earth. 9 would lead it. She spent the next several weeks preparing. She studied human history, which was confusing and often violent. She studied human culture, which was even more confusing because there seemed to be hundreds of different human cultures all existing on the same small planet. She studied human psychology, which made more sense than she expected, but still contained some puzzling elements. One thing stood out to her above all others. Humans had spent most of their history fighting each other. They had divided themselves by skin color, by religion, by geography, by language, by economics. They had created systems to keep each other separate. They had done terrible things to each other based on these divisions. And yet, when she watched their celebrations, she saw something different. She saw them reaching across those divisions. She saw them sharing despite their history. She saw them choosing, again and again, to include rather than exclude. It was not that humans were perfect. Her research made that very clear. They still had conflicts. They still had groups that wanted to keep others out. They still struggled with their own worst impulses. But something in their culture kept pushing them toward inclusion. Something made them want to share their joy instead of hoard it. Something told them that a celebration with more people was better than a celebration with fewer people, even if those people were different. 9 did not fully understand it yet, but she knew she was looking at something important. The research delegation departed 3 weeks later. 14 species were represented, including 9's own people, and even 2 monoliths who had agreed to observe despite their preference for staying home and vibrating. They arrived on Earth during what humans called the holiday season. 9 had assumed this was a single event. She was about to learn how wrong she was. She was about to learn many things about humans and their remarkable, confusing, impossible approach to joy. And nothing she had studied would fully prepare her for what she found. Part 2. The research delegation arrived on Earth in early December, and 9 immediately realized she had underestimated the situation. She had assumed the holiday season was a single celebration. This was incorrect. The humans appeared to be running multiple celebrations at the same time, overlapping and interweaving in ways that her organizational software struggled to map. There was something called Christmas. There was something called Hanukkah. There was something called Kwanzaa. There were various observations related to their planet's axial tilt. There was a New Year celebration, except that different human cultures celebrated the New Year on different dates. And there were at least 3 other festivals happening that seemed to involve competitive eating, which 9 filed under requires further study. The GCA had assigned the delegation a human liaison. Her name was Dr. Maria Santos, and she worked for an Earth organization that handled relations with the unified worlds. She was a small human with dark hair and quick movements, and she seemed to find the delegation's confusion amusing. "You picked a good time to visit," she told them on their first day, "or a complicated time, depends on how you look at it." Ambassador OK, the representative, was the first to voice his confusion. He was a large being, covered in hard plates that he could drum for communication. His mandibles clicked rapidly when he was agitated, and they were clicking now. "They are celebrating different things," he said. "At the same time, in the same spaces, this should cause conflict." "You would think," Dr. Santos said, "follow me." She led the delegation to a public gathering space in a human city. It was a large open area surrounded by buildings, with a tall tree in the center. Humans were everywhere, moving in all directions, carrying bags and packages. "Observe," Nine said to her team. Near the central tree, a human family was adding decorations. The tree had lights and ornaments on it, and the family was carefully placing more. Their clothing and features suggested they were from one particular human cultural tradition. A few meters away, another family was setting up a small table with a candelabra on it. This was for Hanukkah, Nine knew from her research. The candelabra had 9 branches for holding candles, and the family was arranging it with obvious care. Beyond them, a third group was assembling a different kind of display. This one had 7 candles of different colors and various symbolic objects. Kwanzaa, according to Nine's database. All 3 groups were within easy sight of each other, and they were talking. Not arguing, talking. The family decorating the tree had sent one of their children over to watch the candelabra being set up. The child asked questions, and the other family answered happily. The Kwanzaa group had brought food, and they were offering it to everyone nearby. The tree-decorating family accepted with apparent delight. "This is impossible," OK said. "This is Tuesday," Dr. Santos replied. "Do you want to see the office party? From accounting is Hindu, is Jewish, celebrates Diwali and Christmas because her wife is Catholic, and somehow they all agreed on a gift exchange with a 50-credit limit. The negotiations took 3 weeks, but they got there." The delegation spent the next 3 months observing human celebrations. Nine created a documentation protocol, and her team recorded everything they saw. They observed a human wedding where 2 families came from different cultural traditions. The ceremony blended elements from both. Guests participated in rituals from cultures they had not been born into. No one seemed uncomfortable about this. Instead, they seemed honored to be included. Many of the guests cried during the ceremony, and when Nine asked about this, she was told the tears were the good kind. They observed a human funeral. This one surprised the delegation more than anything else. The humans gathered to mourn their dead as most species did. But then something changed. The mourning transformed into something else. Humans told stories about the deceased. Some of the stories were funny and people laughed. They played music the dead person had loved. They ate food the dead person had enjoyed. They cried and they laughed, sometimes at the same time. "How can they laugh?" one of the monoliths asked. It was a genuine question. The monoliths processed grief very differently. "Because he would have wanted us to," a human mourner explained. "He loved to laugh, so we laugh for him." They observed a sporting event. 2 teams were competing, and the fans of each team wore different colors and sat in different sections. They shouted insults at each other. They mocked each other's teams. The atmosphere seemed hostile. But then the game ended. One team won. One team lost, and the fans, mingled, they walked out together. They went to the same restaurants. They continued arguing about the game, but they were smiling while they did it. Fans of the losing team looked devastated, according to Nine's emotional analysis, but they still shared drinks with fans of the winning team. The hostility was performed, Nine noted in her observations. The connection was real. They observed something called a potluck. This was a gathering where humans each brought food to share. The food came from their various cultural backgrounds. There was no coordination of what anyone brought. It should have been chaos. It was not chaos, it was magnificent. Humans walked around the tables, sampling dishes from cultures they had never encountered before. They asked questions about ingredients and preparation methods. They complimented each other's cooking. When someone particularly enjoyed a dish, they asked for the recipe, and the cook always seemed pleased by the request. You share your ancestral recipes with strangers, okay? Asked one human. His mandibles clicked with disbelief. Of course, the human said. Food is better when more people enjoy it. My grandmother would be happy to know her recipe is spreading. They observed a street festival celebrating a specific human culture. Most of the attendees were not from that culture. Nine expected the cultural members to be offended by this intrusion. They were not offended. They were delighted. They taught dances to outsiders. They explained the meanings of their traditions. They dressed outsiders in cultural clothing and took photographs with them. They treated the interest as a compliment rather than a theft. Do you not worry about people taking your traditions? Nine asked one of the festival organizers. The human thought about this for a moment. They can't take them, she said finally. The traditions are still ours, but we can share them. And when we share them, they grow. More people dancing our dances doesn't mean we dance less. It means the world dances more. Nine added this to her notes. She was beginning to understand something important. Human celebration was not about protecting traditions. It was about spreading joy. Humans seemed to believe that joy shared was joy, not joy divided. This belief did not make mathematical sense, but it appeared to function anyway. The more people participated in a celebration, the more joy there was to go around. She wrote her preliminary report for the High Council of Celebration. She spent a long time on the key insight. Humans do not lack cultural boundaries, she wrote. They clearly maintain distinct traditions and identities. Different groups have different practices, and they know which practices belong to which groups. But they treat those boundaries as permeable by invitation. They assume that sharing their joy with outsiders enriches rather than diminishes it. And this assumption, however irrational it may seem, appears to function as a self-fulfilling prophecy. She included all her data. She included footage and emotional readings and statistical analyses. She included statements from humans explaining their approach to celebration. The High Council of Celebration read her report. They called an emergency session to discuss it. And Nine, for the first time in her 400 years, felt something she could only identify as hope. Part 3. The Galactic Celebration Authority held its annual conference on collective joy every cycle, and it was always the same. 300 delegates from across the unified worlds would gather in a grand hall. They would sit in sections organized by species. They would present papers on celebration optimization and joy metrics. They would eat meals at separate tables with their own kind, and they would leave without having experienced any actual joy whatsoever. Nine had attended 50 of these conferences. She had never looked forward to a single one. This year, she proposed something different. We will host it on Earth, she told the High Council, and we will let the humans plan it. The objections came immediately. The delegate expressed concern about what he called geometric chaos. Humans did not organize their celebrations according to mathematical principles. Their events were messy and unstructured. This offended the deeply. The delegation worried about frequency contamination. Their ceremonial drumming existed at specific frequencies, and they did not want those frequencies mixed with the chaotic sounds humans produced at their gatherings. The monoliths vibrated their skepticism for 45 minutes. This was their way of saying they did not think the plan would work. But Nine had prepared her argument carefully. She showed them 300 years of data on joy indices across the unified worlds. The indices were dropping. Every cycle, the member species reported less collective joy than the cycle before. The GCA's mission was failing, and the numbers proved it. She showed them correlation analyses between species isolation and celebration satisfaction. The more species kept to themselves, the less satisfied they were with their celebrations. The data was clear. And then she showed them footage from something humans called Burning Man. The footage showed thousands of humans in a desert. They wore impossible costumes. They danced around a massive burning wooden figure. Art vehicles shaped like ocean creatures rolled past on the sand. Someone was handing out grilled cheese sandwiches to strangers. "I do not understand what I am seeing," the delegate admitted. "Neither did the humans originally," Nine replied. "They created this event without a clear plan. They made up the rules as they went along, and somehow it became one of their most beloved celebrations. That is the point. Human celebration is not about perfect structure. It is about shared experience." The council debated for 3 standard days. In the end, they approved the proposal by a narrow margin. The annual conference on collective joy would be held on Earth, and a human planning committee would organize it. The humans chose a city called New Orleans. Dr. Santos explained that it was a place that will celebrate literally anything, including the absence of things to celebrate. The city had a long history of bringing different cultures together through food and music and parades. It seemed ideal. The Human Planning Committee was given one instruction: treat the delegates as guests who wanted to belong. The conference began on a warm evening. The delegates gathered in a large open area near a river. Most of them stayed in their species groups at first, just as they always had. Old habits were hard to break. But then the music started. It was human music, played by a group called a brass band. The instruments were loud and bright, and completely unlike anything the GCA had ever used at its events. The rhythm was complex but accessible. Even species who had never heard this kind of music before found themselves responding to it. The delegate watched for a long time. Then he made a suggestion. His people could create geometric light displays synchronized to the music. Would the humans be interested? The humans were very interested. Within an hour, the brass band was playing while light formations danced in the air above them. The result was something no one had ever seen before. The humans called it mathematical jazz, which delighted them so much that they abandoned their usual reserve and began adjusting their patterns in response to audience reactions. They watched this with their mandibles clicking nervously. Then one of the human musicians approached them. "I hear you folks drum on your shells," the musician said. "Want to join in?" OK had never played music with another species before. They drummed only among themselves. But he thought about Nine's reports. He thought about what humans called invitation. "I will try," he said. What followed would be remembered for a very long time. The shell drumming combined with the human brass instruments in ways that surprised everyone. They had spent centuries believing their frequencies were incompatible with other species. The humans proved them wrong in about 15 minutes. The jam session lasted for 11 hours. 4 original compositions came out of it, which would later be performed at celebration events across the unified worlds. Even the monoliths found their place. Humans, it turned out, had a tradition called the moment of silence at their celebrations. Sometimes, in the middle of all the noise and activity, everyone would simply stop. They would stand together and appreciate being together. They would feel connected without needing words or music or movement. The monoliths understood this better than any other species present. For the first time in recorded history, other delegates joined them in vibrating appreciation. A stood beside a monolith, trying to feel what the monolith was feeling. A closed his eyes and attempted to vibrate along. Humans stood with them, silent and present. It was not perfect. The frequencies did not align. They did not fully understand. But everyone was trying together, and that was the point. The conference lasted 4 days. There was food from 600 worlds, because the humans had taught everyone about potlucks. There was music that blended traditions in ways that should not have worked but somehow did. There were conversations between species that had never spoken to each other outside of formal negotiations. But the moment that would be recorded in GCA archives forever came on the final evening. Nine was standing near the river, watching the lights reflect on the water. She was thinking about her report. She was thinking about what she would tell the council. She was thinking about whether any of this would actually change anything. A small human approached her, a child approximately 7 Earth years old. The child was holding two things, a crown made of flowers and a slice of something the humans called king cake. "My mom said you're the reason everyone's here," the child said. "Do you want some cake? Also, I made you a crown because you look like you'd be pretty with flowers." Nine looked down at the child. Her crystalline form was not designed for eating. She absorbed nutrients through her base structure, not through consumption, and she had never worn decorations of any kind. In 400 years, it had never occurred to her to try. But she had read her own reports. She had documented what human inclusion looked like. She knew that when humans offered gifts, they were offering connection. "I would be honored," she said. She bent her lattice structure down so the child could place the flower crown on her highest point. The flowers were soft against her crystalline surface. They did not fit properly. They looked, she suspected, slightly ridiculous. She had never felt more decorated in her life. The cake she took carefully in her manipulator appendages. She would not be able to eat it the way humans did, but she promised to enjoy it properly later. And she did. That night, alone in her quarters, she let the cake dissolve slowly through her base structure. It took a long time. She savored every moment. Her final report to the High Council was shorter than usual. She had spent decades writing long reports that no one read. This time, she kept it simple. "Humans do not celebrate better than other species," she wrote. "They celebrate more inclusively. They begin with the assumption that joy can be shared without being diminished. They believe that traditions can be honored while also being opened. They see the stranger at the feast as a guest who simply has not been welcomed yet." This approach is not logical. It does not follow the rules we thought governed celebration, but it works. I recommend that the Galactic Celebration Authority adopt the human model of inclusive joy as our standard framework. Not because humans are superior, not because their way is the only way, but because they have discovered something the rest of us missed. The point of celebration is not the ritual. It is not the tradition. It is not even the joy itself. The point is that we experience it together. Humans have a phrase for this. They say the more the merrier. I propose we make it galactic policy. The resolution passed unanimously. The following year, the annual conference was held on the delegates worried it would not work. They worried the magic of New Orleans could not be repeated. They worried they had learned nothing. They were wrong. They had hired human advisors to help them plan. The result was something no one had expected. There was brass band music, adapted for frequencies. There was geometric light display, provided by artists. There was a potluck featuring dishes from 600 worlds, because everyone had learned what a potluck was. And in one corner of the celebration, a monolith was teaching a human child to vibrate appreciatively. The process was slow. The child could not vibrate the way the monolith did, but the monolith was patient, adjusting and demonstrating, finding ways to help the child understand. 9 watched them from across the room. She was wearing a flower crown that a different human child had made for her that afternoon. It had become something of a tradition. She thought about joy. She thought about sharing. She thought about what it meant to invite someone into your celebration. The humans had taught the galaxy many things, but the most important lesson was simple. Joy grows when you share it. Connection happens when you invite it. And a celebration is not really a celebration until everyone who wants to join is welcome. The monolith and the child vibrated together, imperfectly but sincerely. Around them, 300 species laughed and talked and danced. It was not perfect, it would never be perfect. But it was together, and that was enough.